Montana Territory, August 1874. The baby was crying again. Zadie Thorn pressed her hand gently over her daughter's mouth, heart hammering in her chest. The sheriff's boots echoed outside the barn, deliberate and slow. Dust drifted through a shaft of sunlight, catching on the tiny curls of sweat-damp hair stuck to the baby's forehead. "Please, May," Zadie whispered, rocking her gently. "Please, baby girl. Just a little longer." The sheriff had been through the town twice already that morning. He never came around this often unless someone had talked. Zadie's arms tightened around May as she crouched lower behind a stack of hay bales. Her knees ached, and her dress clung to her from the heat, but she did not move. Outside, a voice called, "Ain't nobody in here but horses, Sheriff." Zadie recognized the voice. Millie, the widow who ran the livery. Kind woman, kept to herself. But even she could not stop the law if it came looking hard enough. "I'll look anyway," the sheriff replied, and Zadie's stomach turned cold. May whimpered, a soft cry cracking through the stale air. Then before the door creaked open, a new voice cut in, smooth and low. "Sheriff," said the man, "your horse's left hind shoe is loose. You keep riding him like that, he's going to go lame." A pause. Then the sheriff grunted, "You sure?" "I am." Zadie dared a glance through the slats in the barn wall. The man was tall, lean, with sun-dark skin and a steady way about him. He stood beside the sheriff's horse, hat tilted back, one hand resting easy on the saddle. "Fine," the sheriff muttered. "I'll come back later." "You better not be hiding her, boy." "I do not even know who her is," the man said, calm as a winter lake. They rode off. Zadie sagged against the hay, her whole body trembling. Only after the hoofbeats faded did the man walk into the barn. He did not say a word at first. Just looked at her. "You can come out now," he said after a moment. "They are gone." Zadie rose slowly, still clutching May. The baby blinked up at the man, then yawned. "Thank you," Zadie whispered. He nodded. "Name's Latham Zeller." She swallowed hard. Zadie Thorn. "This is May." He looked at the baby, then back at her. "You are running from the law?" "Yes," she said. "But not for what they think." "I believe you." Zadie blinked. "You do not even know me. I saw your face when you looked at your girl. That is enough." A silence settled over them. Latham crouched down, pulling a small canteen from his saddlebag. "She thirsty?" Zadie hesitated, then nodded. He poured a bit of water into a tin cup and handed it over. May drank eagerly. Zadie's eyes welled. "They are saying I stole her. That I killed her father." "Did you?" "No. He was the sheriff's brother." Latham held her gaze. "And?" "He forced himself on me," she said, voice shaking. "When I got pregnant, he tried to make me disappear. I ran. He came after me. I fought back. He died." Latham's jaw tightened. Then he stood. "You and May are coming with me." Zadie blinked. "What?" "I have a place north of here. Up in the hills. Quiet. Safe. Nobody will find you there." She clutched May tighter. "Why would you help us?" He looked at her like it was the simplest thing in the world. "Because you need it." Zadie stared at him, her throat tight. Something about his voice calmed the panic in her chest. She nodded. They rode out that night. Latham had a gentle buckskin horse with a soft gait and quiet eyes. He let Zadie take the saddle while he walked alongside, leading them away from the town, away from the pain. The trail wound through pine forest, up into the hills where the wind smelled of sap and creek water. May slept against Zadie's chest, her small hand curled into her mother's blouse. Latham set up camp near a stream. He built the fire low and quiet, moving like he had done this 100 times before. Zadie sat beside him, wrapped in a borrowed blanket, watching the flames. "You live out here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Ran cattle before the war. After, I did not much like people anymore." Zadie glanced at him. "Why help me then?" His eyes met hers. "Because I know what it feels like to be hunted for something you did not choose." She wanted to ask more, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she watched as he reached out and gently tucked May's blanket tighter around her. That night, Zadie did not sleep much. She lay awake with the baby beside her, listening to the wind. But every time she looked at Latham dozing by the fire with a rifle across his lap, something inside her eased. By the time dawn broke, painting the treetops gold, Zadie knew one thing: this man was not like the others. He was safe. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe she and May had a chance. The cabin was tucked into a ridge above a narrow valley, hidden behind a curtain of trees. Latham led them there the next day, his horse climbing the rocky trail like it knew every stone. Zadie stared in disbelief as the clearing opened up. A solid log house with a stone chimney, a little barn, a fenced garden. You built this. Built most of it before the war. Finished it after. Inside, it was clean and warm and smelled faintly of cedar. Latham set down a kettle on the stove, then turned to her. You can stay here, as long as you need. Zadie nodded slowly. Thank you. He paused. But if that sheriff comes back, it is going to look suspicious. A man and a woman with a baby. Folks talk. Zadie's heart started to pound again. I can fix that, he said quietly. She looked up. We say the baby is mine, he said. And you are my wife. She stared at him, stunned. I know it is a lot, he said. But it will stop the questions. And I will mean what I say. You and May will be mine to protect. Zadie blinked fast. Her throat burned. You would do that for us? I would. She took a shaky breath. You do not even know me. I know enough. May started to fuss. Zadie picked her up, holding her close. Her heart was thudding hard, but not from fear. From something else. Something warmer. She looked at Latham. His eyes were steady. His hands were gentle. And in that moment, a strange, impossible hope stirred inside her. All right, she whispered. We will be yours. Latham's cabin held the cool hush of a space long lived in by one man. Zadie stepped carefully across the plank floor, taking in the rough-hewn table with its single chair, the row of books lined on a shelf above the hearth, the coat hanging by the door with worn elbows and a patch on one shoulder. May stirred in her arms, fussing a little from the ride, so she laid her on the quilted bed tucked into the corner. I'll sleep in the barn, Latham said, setting down a pail near the stove. You take the bed. Zadie brushed May's hair gently off her brow. You built all this with your own hands? Most of it. Took me 3 winters to get it to hold heat right. The stone chimney's the only part one hired help for. She turned toward him. You read? He nodded once. My mother taught me. She was a teacher back in Arkansas. Before everything turned to ash. Zadie looked at the books again. Some were leather-bound, others faded and frayed at the edges. I haven't seen a book since before May was born. He crossed the room and pulled one from the shelf. This one's about plants that grow wild up here. Might be useful to know what won't kill you. She took it from him, fingers brushing his. Thank you. Latham stepped back. There's a spring behind the cabin. Cold enough to keep milk from turning. I'll show you in the morning. That night, the air cooled sharp and fast. Zadie lay curled around May, wrapped in a wool blanket that smelled faintly of pine smoke. Wind whispered against the chinking in the logs. Somewhere nearby, a tree groaned. But the baby breathed steady, and the house didn't creak like the places they'd slept before. In the morning, Zadie found Latham splitting wood beside the barn. His shirt clung to his back, soaked with sweat, though the sun had barely cleared the ridge. He worked without rhythm, as though he needed the ache in his shoulders to keep something else at bay. I can help, she said. He glanced up but didn't stop. You ever split fur? No, but I can carry it. He nodded toward the stacked rounds. Take what you can. Pile it near the door. She worked until her arms trembled. Latham didn't tell her to stop. When she paused to nurse May under the shade of the porch, he brought her a tin cup filled with water so clear it shimmered. That spring's colder than snowmelt, he said. Keeps the butter hard. She drank in sips, her lips cracked from the dry air. You keep animals? 2 milk goats. A few hens. The horse. I run some traps late fall. Sell pelts come winter. I could help with the goats. I've milked before. He nodded once. I'd welcome it. Later, he showed her the path to the spring. A narrow trail winding behind the house and down through a patch of alder. Zadie carried May in a sling tied across her front, her steps careful over the roots. You always live this quiet? She asked. Since the war ended. She waited, but he didn't go on. I used to think I'd live in a town, she said. Maybe teach, or mend dresses. But I never got that far. You might still. No. I think I'm meant for trees now. He looked at her then, and something in his gaze softened. That's not a bad thing. They walked back in silence, the kind that didn't press or pull, just settled easy between them. That evening, after May was fed and sleeping in a basket Latham had made from woven pine, he brought in a jar of preserved peaches. You can these? She asked, surprised. I know what I like to eat. She laughed, the sound startling in its brightness. He held her gaze for a moment, then turned away, setting 2 tin plates down. As they ate, she asked, You ever been married? No, why not? He chewed slowly. Because I never found someone who made me want to give up the quiet. And now. He didn't answer right away. The fire popped. A moth fluttered near the lantern. I think maybe quiet's better when it's shared. Zadie set her fork down. Her fingers brushed the edge of the table. I don't know how to be someone's wife. Not really. I'm not asking you to be anything but what you already are. She looked down at her lap. May shifted in sleep. A soft sigh. When I was still carrying her, I used to talk to her. Tell her stories. About a place where no one told me what I was worth. Where no one could take her from me. Latham didn't speak, but she felt his attention like a weight. I didn't think it could be real, she went on. I still don't know if it is. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. This place is real. I won't pretend it's perfect. But it's yours now if you want it. She met his eyes. And you. He nodded once. If you'll have me. The wind shifted outside and a coyote called from somewhere distant. Zadie reached out, her fingers brushing his, just for a moment. I think I'd like that, she said. He didn't smile, but something in his face changed, eased, deepened. They sat like that until the lantern burned low, the hush between them no longer empty, but full. By late September, the air held the dry bite of autumn, and the trees on the ridge behind the cabin had begun to turn gold, rust, a few already bare. Zadie stood at the edge of the garden with May bundled against her chest, watching Latham mend a broken post in the goat pen. The quiet between them had changed. It no longer felt like distance. She stepped over the fence and crouched beside him. The goats get out again? Just the brown one. Smart enough to lift the latch with her horn. Zadie pressed her cheek lightly to May's soft cap. You ever think about having more animals? Latham tested the post's sturdiness before answering. I've thought about a mule. Could haul supplies easier down from the trading post. But it's a long ride to town. She nodded, brushing a curl from May's temple. Might be good, though. Just in case we need something that won't grow out of the ground. He looked up. You want to ride in with me next time? I'd like to. That night, after May had fallen asleep with her fingers curled around the edge of her mother's shawl, Zadie stepped out onto the porch. Latham was sitting with a small piece of wood in his hand, carving something smooth and rounded with the tip of his knife. You always make things when you can't sleep? She asked, sitting beside him. He didn't look up. Keeps my hands busy. What is it? He turned it, revealing a little horse, no bigger than her palm. For May. Thought she might like it when she's older. Zadie looked at him, then reached out and touched the edge of the carving. You're good with your hands. He gave a short breath through his nose. Better with tools than words. I don't mind the quiet, she said. But I do like knowing what you think. He paused. I think you're brave. She leaned back, her voice low. I wasn't. Not always. You are now. The silence wrapped around them again, different than before. She watched the moonlight drift across the yard, silvering the edges of the fence. "Do you miss Arkansas?" He shook his head. "Not what it became. Folks I knew either died or went hard. My father was hanged. I left the same week." Zadie's breath caught. "Why?" "He hid some freedmen on our land. Claimed they were hired hands. That wasn't good enough." She reached out, laying her hand over his. "I'm sorry." He looked at her, eyes steady. "You ever miss where you came from?" There was nothing to miss. She traced her thumb along the bone of his wrist. "Just a room with no locks and too many rules." They sat without speaking until the lantern inside flickered out on its own. Latham stood first. He offered her his hand, and she took it without hesitation, letting him guide her back inside. The days shortened. Frost clung to the grass in the mornings, and Zadie began stitching a quilt from worn shirts Latham had set aside. She boiled down apples from the small tree behind the barn, and May started teething, her gums red and her patience short. Latham carved her a ring from smooth birch, which she gummed until she fell asleep with it still clutched in her hand. One evening, while Zadie was sewing by the fire and May lay on a blanket gnawing on a corner of cloth, Latham reached into the cupboard and pulled out a small wooden box. He set it on the table and sat down across from her. "My mother left me this. Said I should only open it when I had a reason." Zadie looked up. "You haven't. Until now I didn't." He lifted the lid. Inside was a thin gold band, simple and unadorned, wrapped in a faded scrap of blue calico. Zadie stared at it. "She meant it for a wedding?" Latham nodded. "She wanted me to have something that came from love." Zadie's breath caught in her throat. She set her sewing aside, stood, and crossed to him. "I never imagined this kind of life," she whispered. "Not with anyone, not even in dreams." He reached for her hand. "You want it." She looked down at their fingers, hers ink-stained and calloused, his rough but warm. "I do." He slipped the ring on her finger. Fit, snug but not tight. She didn't cry. She just leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his, their hands still joined between them. That night, they moved together without ceremony or hesitation. The fire dimmed behind them, casting long shadows across the floor. They made no promises aloud. They didn't need to. In the quiet afterward, May stirred once in her sleep and went still again. Zadie lay curled beside Latham, her hand resting over his chest, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breath. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She was home. The first snow came overnight, soft as sifted flour. Zadie opened the door just after dawn and found the world muted beneath a white hush. The trees stood still, their limbs burdened with powder, and the path to the barn was nearly erased. May stirred in her shawl sling, her breath warm against Zadie's neck. Behind her, Latham was setting kindling into the stove. He didn't speak, but there was a quiet attentiveness in the way he kept glancing toward the window. Zadie pulled a wool scarf tighter over her chest. "I'll bring in the eggs." He didn't look up. "Watch for ice near the trough." She nodded once and stepped out, her boots crunching through the crusted snow. The cold bit at her cheeks, but the air smelled clean, sharper than before, and the sky had a kind of pale clarity that made each pine needle stand out. Inside the coop, the hens clucked low and restless. She moved slowly, careful not to jostle May, and gathered what little the birds had laid. As she turned to leave, a sound caught her attention, distant hooves, faint but growing. She stepped outside. A rider was approaching along the ridge trail, a dark figure against the pale expanse, his horse picking its way through the snow. Latham was already outside by the time she reached the porch, rifle resting across his forearm. Zadie didn't speak. Neither did he. The rider drew closer, then reined in by the fence. He was older, with a red wool scarf wrapped high over his jaw and a long coat the color of river mud. "Zeller," the man called. Latham stepped forward. "Ephraim." Zadie stayed where she was. The man glanced toward her, then back at Latham. "Had word from down near Flathead." Sheriff from Barlow's been asking the blacktail trappers about a woman with a baby. Said he's riding north. Latham's voice was flat. How close? 3, maybe 4 days out. Depends on the weather. Zadie's throat tightened. Latham nodded once. You didn't see me, he said. Ephraim gave a short nod. I never do. The man turned his horse and rode off without another word. Zadie didn't speak until the hoofbeats faded. Latham lowered the rifle. Will he talk? No, she looked down at May, who was gnawing on one finger, oblivious. What do we do? Nothing changes. But we prepare? Inside, Latham rolled up a hide map from the top shelf and unlatched the trapdoor in the floorboards. Beneath it, a shallow cellar held 2 crates, a sack of meal, and a set of snowshoes. Zadie crouched beside him. You've done this before. Yes. For yourself. He rolled the map without looking at her. Once. She waited, but he didn't offer more. She ran her fingers along the edge of the map. Where does it lead? Over the pass. East of the basin. There's a cabin there. Old Trapper's place. Empty now. Would we survive the crossing with May? He paused. If we had to, yes. She nodded. But you don't think we will? No, that night she braided her hair slowly, sitting by the fire. Latham was mending a snowshoe strap with sinew, his hands steady. I used to dream of the ocean, she said. He looked up. There was a woman in town when I was small. Said she'd seen it once, out in California. I used to imagine the sound of it big and endless. Somewhere no one could find you. He set the snowshoe aside. You still want to go there? I don't know. Maybe I just wanted something bigger than what I had. He nodded slowly. You've got that now. She smiled faintly, then stood and crossed to him. Do you think we'll have to run? He looked up at her, the firelight catching in the lines beside his eyes. No. I think if he comes, I'll stop him. She laid her hand against his cheek. I believe you. In the days that followed, they moved carefully, extra firewood stacked beneath the porch, dried food packed tight in sacks, a small pouch of coins stitched into the lining of Zadie's coat. But they didn't live like they were waiting for a storm. Latham taught her how to snare rabbit without bait, how to spot deer sign in the snow. May began to teeter on her feet, her first steps slow and wide-legged, her laugh startling and bright. One morning Zadie was kneeling beside the stove, feeding and kindling, when she heard footsteps behind her. Latham set something down beside her, a pair of small leather boots, stitched by hand. For May, he said. Zadie picked one up, turning it over gently. You made these. He gave a soft nod. She stood and reached for his hand. You know, if we stay here long enough, she'll grow into this place. Latham's hand curled around hers. She already has. Zadie stepped closer. And me. You've been part of it since the moment you walked through the barn. She leaned into him, her voice low. Then let's make it hers. All of it. Not borrowed. Not hidden. Hers. And yours. She nodded. And yours. He kissed her then, slow and sure, and the warmth between them rose like the fire, quiet but steady. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and soundless, covering every old track and marking the beginning of something new. The snow didn't last. By late March, meltwater ran in shallow rivulets down the slope behind the cabin, soaking the earth until the ground gave underfoot in soft, wet sighs. Zadie stood in the garden plot with her skirts hitched above her boots, testing the soil with her fingers. It was dark and rich beneath the frost line, and when she pressed it between her hands, it held its shape. She's ready, she said. Latham joined her with a sack of seed potatoes slung over one shoulder. We'll need to fence it higher this year. Elk broke the last line near the north edge. Could run a second rail, she offered. I can carve stakes after May naps. He nodded, setting the sack down beside the old planting row. You think she'll like digging in the dirt once she's older? Zadie smiled, brushing her palms against her skirt. She already tries to eat it. They planted in the afternoons, May bundled beside the garden in a wooden crate lined with old wool. Her hands waved at the sky while Zadie and Latham worked in rhythm. He turned the earth, and she followed with the seed, pressing each piece into the damp ground with quiet care. One morning, she paused to stretch her back and caught him watching her, elbow leaned against the shovel handle. "What?" she asked, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. Latham stepped forward and reached for something in her hair. "Straw," he said, plucking it free. Her breath caught, not from the gesture, but the way he looked at her, like he was seeing something not just in front of him but rooted deep. "You ever think," he said slowly, "what we might be 10 years from now?" She turned to glance at May, who'd fallen asleep with one fist curled beside her cheek. "I think we'll still be here," she said, "maybe with more hands to help at planting." He looked down at her, his voice low. "You want more. If they come," she said. "If they belong to this place like we do." Latham reached for her hand and laced his fingers through hers. "Then we'll build another cradle." That evening, Zadie sat by the hearth sewing a new dress for May while Latham sanded a plank for the fence rail. Outside, the last of the melt dripped from the eaves in slow, steady rhythm. The shadows stretched across the floor long before they lit the lantern, content to work by firelight. "I've been thinking about your name," she said, not looking up from her stitches. He paused. "What about it?" "Zeller. You ever think of passing it to someone?" He leaned back against the wall, setting the sandpaper aside. "I never thought I'd have someone to pass it to." "You do now," she said, meeting his eyes. "And you've got me too." He stood, crossed the room, and crouched beside her. "You want to take it? I want it to be ours." She reached for his hand. Not a hiding name, a chosen one. He took her hand in both of his, warm and calloused. "Zadie Zeller," he said, trying it aloud. "I like how it sounds." They were married the next morning under the ash tree behind the barn. No preacher, no neighbors, just them and the wind, and May cradled in Zadie's shawl, her eyes wide and still. Latham held her hands and spoke the words he'd written on a scrap of paper, voice steady and clear. "I will keep you safe, and I will walk beside you, and I will never turn away." Zadie didn't need paper. She looked up into his eyes and said, "You are my home. You and her. And wherever we go, I will carry you with me." He kissed her then, not careful, not slow, but sure. Beneath the pale sky, with snow still clinging to the tree roots, they bound themselves to each other without fanfare, without witness, and without hesitation. Spring settled like a bomb. The goats birthed 2 kids in April, one black with a white ear and the other pale as cream. Zadie fed them by hand when their mother grew weak, and May toddled after them in the yard, squealing with delight. Latham added a second room to the cabin by June. Zadie helped him set the rafters, her arms stronger than they'd been the year before. They slept that night on the floor of the new room just to feel the space. May curled between them, her thumb in her mouth. In August, a letter arrived from Ephraim, delivered by a passing trapper. The paper was creased and smudged with pine pitch, but the meaning was clear. Sheriff from Barlow rode back south. Gave up the chase. Word as the laws changed hands. Latham folded the letter and slid it into the cupboard. Zadie said nothing. She just wrapped her arms around his waist and pressed her face to his chest. The garden bloomed high that year. They dug potatoes by the bushel, strung beans to dry in the rafters, and hung thick braids of garlic from the eaves. Zadie taught May how to brush down the goats with a switch of sage, and Latham carved her a spoon small enough for her hand. One evening in late September, with the sun dipping behind the ridge and the sky streaked with the last gold of summer, Zadie stood at the fence, arms folded over the top rail. Latham joined her, his shirt still damp from hauling wood. "Feels like the start of something," she said. He nodded. "It is." She turned to him. "I never told you back then. When we were hiding in that barn, I almost ran again. I thought I'd bring you trouble." "You did," he said. "But you also brought everything else." She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I'm not afraid anymore." "Good," he said, wrapping an arm around her. "Because I'm not letting you go." They stood like that until the stars came. Until the night settled like a blanket over their land, their home, their life. Inside, May called out, and they turned together, walking back toward the cabin, hand in hand, into the warmth of the lighted doorway. And there, in the quiet glow of a life they built from nothing but truth and time, they stayed together, always.